This is Aberration Earth. Chapter 2. The Blanched Land. A light drizzling rain had started not a half hour ago. The pitter-patter of droplets tapped rhythmically upon Merrick's helm. The constant drone filled his ears. He kept a careful watch on his disturbing surroundings. He was curious about the wet conditions, and after noting the effect the water line along the shore seemed to have on the coloration distortions, he wanted to know if this caused a similar reaction. After an hour had passed and the rain had come and gone, he was somewhat disappointed to see that the downpour had no effect on the world around him. The same strange variances remained present, but colors were not the only unusual thing about this phenomenon. He had noted, while sitting on that rock by the beach, that some of the intrinsic qualities of the objects were seeping into one another. The stone in question, for example, had been quite soft to his touch, more like the sandy-hued bushes beside it, which felt coarse in comparison. This process appeared to be repeating wherever the bleeding occurred. Some greenery was hardened. Other things that shouldn't be were supple. One thing he had not seen yet was any wildlife, be it rodent, insect, or bird, which left him feeling uneasy. Had there been sounds, or even evidence of nesting, he would be more confident moving on, but as it stood, he wasn't certain how this environment might affect living things. With some trepidation, he decided to continue. He hadn't been able to accurately scan the coastline, and there was no record of this location available in his optical microchip, so he had no idea how large the island was. But he didn't see going around it as a better option either. After hiking for an hour, leaving him soaking wet and burdened with uncertainty, he nearly overlooked a startling shift in the terrain to his right. No more than 20 yards away, where grass and earth slid together in a mixing of greens and browns, there was a long, wide trail, alabaster-like, cutting across his sight. It was a line of pale white, which seemed to him to have no source, but was itself the absence of color, or perhaps had been inserted there unnaturally, he couldn't say. It was unnerving to his senses, and for a moment he found it disorienting, but he quickly cast his attention onto his own hand, which he held up to anchor his perspective. Now, it would seem to him that what was happening was the result of some animated force he could not see, as this washing of color happened in a path, as if something were pushing through a cornfield and shoving the stalks aside as it went. Reaching for his pelter, he stopped before fully drawing the sidearm from its holster. There was nothing there that he could see, but he couldn't be sure. This world hid dangers he would have never believed. Prudence and caution had gotten him this far. He wouldn't exert energy where it wasn't needed, nor would he waste precious ammunition carelessly. So he pulled his hand back, leaving the weapon secure against his leg. What could be causing it? He hadn't the faintest idea. Perhaps it had something to do with the fairyland he had been exposed to when Grace had saved him, though this seemed entirely different in truth. Pondering what he was witnessing, Merrick remained on his chosen route, a path as directly north as he could manage, which was quite precise thanks to his internal guidance. They, the Zaxvoyan Voyagers, had been well designed for independent navigation. His sense of direction was unerringly accurate, so that even while he lacked data on this region, he knew which way he was going thanks to the bio-firmware augmenting his brain. He stopped cold in his tracks less than a kilometer later when he spotted ahead in the distance, perhaps 2 to 3 kilometers away, the distinct silhouettes of a dozen human figures standing very still along open hilly terrain. Uncertain if these were the primitive locals he had observed earlier, he continued to pace with a bit more caution, mindful that to the native people he had recorded so far, he knew he might appear as strange as any of the monstrous things that seemed to plague this world. No more than a kilometer closer, and he could make out that he was being watched. They were indistinct in their features from still so far, but he was sure those heads were all turned on him. Their garb was pale in the morning sun. He couldn't tell yet what type of cloth or armor they might be wearing. With long instruments in hand, he thought they could either be holding farming or fishing tools as easily as spears or other weapons. As he came closer, his sense of unease increased. Faces remained indistinguishable when he should have been able to make them out. Even with his enhanced vision, they were obscured. The more he looked at them, the more troubled he became. These watchmen didn't just shine in the mid-morning sun. They were shimmering as if radiating heat. It wasn't long, though, before he was able to verify his own worries. As the first of these so-called people came into clear sight, it was obvious that they were far from human. Pale wasn't an adequate description here. They were like ghosts in a certain respect, lacking any pigmentation or hue. Their skin shone a pure white, reminding him of the trails he'd seen. Merrick wondered what it meant and offered a restrained wave at the nearest of them, hoping that this gesture would be understood as a non-aggressive action, letting them know his intentions were benign. It raised its arm in turn, and he felt some of the tension within him ease. At least they were being reciprocal. It gave him hope that he might be able to hold a conversation with them, and perhaps get some help. As he was about to offer a greeting, he noticed with some horror that the thing that was parroting his hand wave was missing half of its arm. It wasn't that it was an amputee. This was much different. There were whole pieces that were just absent, as if they had been carved away perfectly, leaving gaping holes where flesh and bone should have been. But the arm was still working, as if that negative space had no impact on its ability to remain functional. And with growing alarm, he noted that it was like this across the creature's entire body. A wedge-sized section of its face was missing, leaving it with only one pitted eyeball to stare out from. It did not blink, and shifted between black and white, depending on how the light fell against it. Lowering his hand, it did the same, and he came to a stop several yards away. Now seeing it in full detail, he was left mortified by the sight, thinking that these things were more like a sad mockery of the human form. Swallowing his repulsion, he hoped that he could hold a dialogue with them, and that their very strange outward appearance was not a comment on their character. So, restraining himself from the powerful impulse to start firing indiscriminately, he spoke through his voice filter instead, letting it cycle through dozens of dialects. "I'm a traveler from another land. I mean you no harm. I'm looking for the northern shore of this island." His last word was cut off by a wailing sound that the thing suddenly began making in response, which seemed to trigger the others around it, who all did the same, causing a terrible chorus to erupt between them. He nearly didn't reach his sidearm fast enough, as the howling, deformed, crippled, quasi-human-like creature burst into action, running at him with a dull-looking spear it picked up off the ground from its feet. The nasty barbed tip was pointed right at his chest. With a curse, Merrick unloaded, landing 3 shots that punched a pair of holes through his attacker's torso, slowing it down not one bit, though the third, through its head, did, which must have hit something vital as it caused it to drop almost immediately. 5 more of the howling nightmares that he had believed to be people were only moments away, following their now dead companion's lead. They had charged in just as quickly and came within feet. Instinctively, the spaceman aimed at their heads, his decades of training and experience taking over. He brought them all down with a single shot released into each. The remaining 6 were running in opposite directions from him, fleeing as soon as their fellows had been killed, and while he had the opportunity to take them out right then, shooting them in the back wasn't something he felt was justified. After he let them go, he reloaded his weapon and squatted down to take a closer look at the nearest bodies, deciding that if these things had been human once, they were anything but human now, at least judging by their appearances. And there ends this episode. Until next time, thanks for listening. Please engage the like button and subscribe to the channel for more content.